right, well, let's get to talking about some of these tanking teams in the NBA. So I asked you, it was either last week or a couple weeks ago, if we could do a segment about the youngest teams in the NBA, in particular, the teams that are tanking but have young stars on them, uh, and talk about their sort of progress when it comes to the development of the young stars on their team. And we could talk about like where their teams sit, right?
Which team would you say is like out of these bottom teams the most impressive to you?
This is kind of surprising because they're impressive, but they're not the best one. They're impressive because of how bad I thought they would be.
The
It,
way that the expectations
yeah,
were like, or what messes with this?
it's actually the Portland Trailblazers.
Yeah, I was curious why or like where you stood on this.
So my inspiration for wanting to do a segment on this was catching a few Blazers games. I had fun watching them like beat the Wolves a couple times. You and I are going to talk a little bit about them playing the Sacramento Kings. But the Portland Trailblazers have this really interesting team full of it's a lot of role players, right? The best probably all around just like player that they have is unfortunately DeAndre Ayton. Who is not necessarily impressive on this team, even for a player, on a tanking team. But they have Tumani Kamara, whose offense has been coming along a bit this season. They're giving him a few more like on-ball reps. He's a good cutter. He's a good fit. Like he's great in transition. All this stuff. Good playmaker. Like he's a good like connective piece. Chris Murray also has been looking a little bit more comfortable doing some things with the ball. He still can't really shoot. And they added Denny Avdia from the Washington Wizards last year, who can do like a lot with the ball in his hands. And he has been shooting a little bit better too. But the reason that I brought them up is not for any of those reasons, but their defense. And the game that like really like opened my eyes to it was, I believe it was the second game that they won against the Minnesota Timberwolves, where he's since been injured. I believe he sprained his MCL. But Donovan Clingan, who is their newest rookie from this recent rookie class, just completely owned the paint on both sides of the floor. Just defensive rebounds, blocking shots, offensive rebounds, kicking out, all this stuff. And that in combination with the perimeter defensive personnel that the Blazers have was actually creating a lot of like nasty problems for some of these otherwise good teams, or at least decent teams, especially offensively, in a way that surprised the teams that they were playing. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but I guess I have. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do you have to say about the Portland Trailblazers?
Yeah, they're a weird team. It's like a mix of some interesting veterans, like with Robert Williams, who he's always hurt and has barely even played. But when he played, he can have some impact. Jeremy Grant is like a player that a lot of teams like. He played on the Nuggets, and he's such an up and down weird player where he has potential but doesn't necessarily always live up to what he might think of himself. And then you got like Avdia, who's a fun player to watch. Clingan, he's hurt. They just drafted him, but he was interesting. And then Scoot is one of those players where people are still trying to figure out how he's going to develop. I guess what stood out to me was Anthony Simons, because his like, and then not kind of in a good way. I thought he would be better just because his 3-point percent is not looking great in terms of just his pure average. And he's like the, highest volume 3-point shooting player on the team. And it's a pretty low average for him. And he used to be someone who just, every time the Nuggets play him, he murders us and he hits like a billion threes. And I'm super frustrated by him.
And that's what's going to happen when we play them, by the way. He's going to get his averages way up after that Nuggets game.
And, Chauncey Billups is like, we love Chauncey from the Nuggets, and he's the coach there. And it kind of was a crappy deal with him coming in and then Dame being traded. And now it's like this weird Frankenstein roster almost. Shaedon Sharp's really good around the rim. Doesn't really make a lot of threes. I think they just struggle from three.
Yeah, this team lacks offensive talent. So, like, they don't really have, like the other teams we're going to talk about, a traditional star that we can talk about a developmental trajectory. So this team is also weird in that, like, the way that we're talking about them is more like, here's the problem, though. I just realized they do have Scoot Henderson. who I don't believe he played in the game versus the Kings that you and I both watched, but yeah, he's like a role player on this team, and those minutes look really rough still. Not quite as bad as last season. Like he's a little bit more patient in pick and roll and getting downhill and that kind of thing. The shot, I'm still not like super buying it. But as a point guard, he's not really like a floor general or a really good scorer. So that's like not a good competition
But hey,
for your franchise star. So I guess they do have a franchise star, but he hasn't really manifested as one quite
but
yet.
they got Dalano Banton, and he
Dude,
looked kind of
okay.
good.
Dalano Banton has been absolutely cooking on the Portland Trailblazers this season. He was a huge problem for the Kings in that game. Really good at running the floor in transition, just really and pushing pace with the ball in his hands, finishing at the rim, just doing all the things that you want your like traditional point guard to do. Really good at running pick and roll, even with Ayton. Actually, if you look at the on-off stats, he actually leads the Trailblazers in on-off. They are 24 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor than off. Those are like last year's Jokic level numbers in terms of on-off. Like they are 24 points worse with him off the floor. And maybe that's because Scoot Henderson is running the show. But yeah, they're a weird team, man.
Where the hell has Dalano Banton been?
He was a Celtic before he was a Blazer, I believe. I think they just didn't play him because of the defense, but it's looked better on the Blazers. But I think the Celtics are looking for a particular kind of like stockier guy.
He's tall. He's 6'8", guard, 38% from three.
I was like, do we need Dalano Banton? I'm like trying to restrain myself and not fall into like NBA draft Twitter holes, but rabbit holes. But it's tough when you see a guy like having this kind of impact on a terrible team.
Yeah. Well, one question of the Blazers for you. Why do you think their defense is ranked 26th when you are, impressed with their defense? What's the deal here?
First, like the main reason, honestly, is that over the last 2 weeks, so they were actually like 22nd when I watched those Timberwolves games, and then this Kings game, they were probably so they've definitely tailed off a lot. And 22nd for a tanking team is like pretty good. So that's exactly why I was impressed with them.
If you're one of those teams and you have like your offense or defense or whatever is like nearing the 20s, you're going to have a shot at making the playoffs, something like that. Maybe like the Spurs are 20th in offense and 18th in defense. So that's why I think they've gotten worse. So like it didn't last, but they were playing good defense for a stretch. And it kind of also matched with the Blazers were in a lot of like close games with like mid teams last year. And they were getting completely blown out by like everybody else. And the defense was why like all those games were coming down to like both teams scoring less than 100 points and all of that. So I was curious to see if that would advance this season. Hasn't gotten better, but they had a good stretch and then they kind of started to let go of the rope quite a bit. But it's really the offense that is like the real culprit on this team. I mean, they're scoring like 108 points per 100 possessions, which is like I think that's almost as bad as the worst offense last year, which was the Hornets. Actually, it's worse. The Hornets were scoring 109 points per 100 last year. And they don't have the offensive talent right now. Because Scoot's not that guy yet. With these bad teams, it's all related, right? Like you're not scoring, so your defense is harder. So, you have to defend more in transition, and it's just not good. Well, if you have watched to this point, thank you so much. You probably are subscribed if you have watched to this point. But if you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. And if you like our content, please remember to hit the like bell. Please share our show. We're trying to grow the channel. Please hit the notification bell. We also have our clip channel at What's in a Game NBA Clips. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks. It really sucks.